Were he alive today, Cleary Bunch Washington would urge us all to use his life story and also his art as a springboard for reflection about America's most challenging and divisive issues. He would do this not out of a desire to provoke conflict, but rather out of his utter conviction that the more you understood him, the closer you would be to glimpsing the power, strength, and beauty he discerned in all people, regardless of their outward appearance.
Somewhere, baby, it's part of me, apart from me. Your rain waves the hollow.
Bunch Washington was an African-American artist from Philadelphia who studied at the Barnes Foundation, Fleischer Art Memorial, and the Philadelphia Museum School. He was a poet, an artist, a musician, an entrepreneur, most importantly, an educator.
"Sit with me," he would say, "and let's talk about a few things." He was a talker, one of the greats who could melt hours into minutes or vice versa. He did not care if you had a previous obligation, nor did it matter if he was expected elsewhere. He regarded each human interaction as important, timely, and ripe with opportunity.
I met Bunch Washington in the very evening of his life. He was within a few months of passing away. And I met him because he came to my house and asked me to drive him to New York. And so we got in the car and we drove about 100 miles or so to New York. And when we were on our way to New York, I got a chance to talk with him about all kinds of things. I mean, we got stopped by the police because we were speeding. Now, that's interesting that we were stopped by the police because we were speeding, because the energy that Bunch Washington produced was so powerful that actually it sort of made everything speed up. He lived the kind of life that inspired in other people a quality of vitality, intellectual vitality, spiritual vitality, social vitality. So he was a very engaging man. He was a living soul, and he thought deeply about everything. He loved deeply, and he was charismatic. And in that brief period, I really grew to admire him very, very deeply. So that was my first meeting with him.
Bunch Washington wrote an essay called "The Art of Romare Bearden," commenting on the style and the significance of Romare Bearden's work. And the essay itself was filled with poetry and really incredible phrasing, beautiful words, incredible images. And it just made it abundantly clear to me that art kind of abounded everywhere in Bunch Washington's life. Everything he did it in an artistic and beautiful way. So I took some of the words that he said in that essay and I turned it into some poetry. And I just kind of combined little pieces that I found to be particularly important. And it's phenomenal, the beauty of his words, even in an academic setting. It really inspired me and has really encouraged me to try and write as beautifully as I can, whether it be an essay on literature or poetry. He's had a significant influence on me and the artistic direction of my life.
I have been for a long time interested in the relationship between mental health and creativity. And one of the reasons why I became interested in this was because of the work of the famous playwright whose name was Sophocles. Sophocles wrote plays about people who were in the abyss or in the depths of suffering. So when I read about the life and became familiar with the life of Bunch Washington, he seemed like one of Sophocles' characters. He seemed like a kind of an Oedipus. And so we began to study the relationship between his suffering and his creativity. And so in my discussions with his daughter, Liz Washington, we decided to collaborate on the creation of an exhibition that would explore the relationship between suffering and creativity. You know, he kept a journal, and the journal was called Sleeping in the Fire. And that notion of sleeping in the fire captures well, on the one hand, the tremendous suffering that he endured. I mean, he described it as a kind of a fire. And on the other hand, maintaining a sense of composure, having a kind of a dwelling in the fire, and in this dwelling to produce portraits of light, which was his art, was really his great contribution.
The idea behind this installation, this art, this arrangement of items, is that we wanted to create a space where conversations could happen that go past the usual kind of dialogue that often takes place in an academic setting, or particularly in a museum. So as you know, there's a feeling of reverence when you walk into a museum and you know that you're among great works of art. And the traditional way of showing that art is to have a room completely empty, to dramatize this art, and to have the art hanging usually in one room. And you walk slowly through the room and you are able to interact with that art. So we thought, what would it be like if we had that same art almost like you're living with it, rather than visiting it in its high place?
Of the Phillips Museum of Art. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this very exciting opening reception of Painting with Light, the Art of Bunch Washington. This exhibition was curated by Ms. Elizabeth Washington, Souza, and various consulting artists. They installed this exhibition over the course of the summer very, very carefully. It was fun actually coming up throughout the course of the summer and watching it change and develop as their vision became clearer to them about what they wanted to present. Over the course of this semester, this exhibit will extend to Professor Penn's classroom and to a day-long conference, Rethinking Relationships, on Saturday, October 18th.
Being a part of this class has definitely grown an appreciation within myself for art and understanding feelings and emotions behind art. I think one of my favorite quotes that I got from this class would be that art doesn't have to make you feel good, art just has to make you feel.
Bunch associated with people from really all different stratospheres of society. People that he met when he opened his soul food restaurant in New York, to those esteemed artists that he interacted with. He really loved and knew people from everywhere, and we're lucky enough to have some of those esteemed guests with us today. The list is incredible, and the accolades are indescribable. There's too many. It would take the rest of the program to list all the accomplishments of our guests.
My encounter with Bunch Washington seemed to have been written in the stars. It's almost like to me, it's not coincidence.
I did not meet Mr. Washington in person, but I first encountered Mr. Washington on the first page of the essay that his daughter Liz included in her portfolio to apply to graduate school. With Daddy, she wrote, every minute was a surprise. That was the whole beauty of being his daughter.
That he was concerned with people understanding his humanity. How important it was that people see beyond what they wanted to see to actually see him. And so for that, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful that we're studying and talking about and celebrating someone who saw our humanity.
I had the great pleasure of meeting and getting to know both Romare Bearden and Bunch Washington, and each of them was a man that you would remember precisely when you met them. I encountered Bunch during the 70s when he came out with that very important book. It was the first big, serious book on an African-American pen. It's hugely important because we were part African-American artists' art. Joshua Johnson, all the rest of it is art. And Bunch really made that point. He made it in that book. It was a hugely, hugely important, transcendent, primal book, really, in art. And not just for African-American art, but for art in general. And this was a major, I mean, that contribution alone, if he had did nothing else, if he had done nothing else, of course he'd had the children and stuff, that's more important, but I want to get into that. But if he had done that, I mean, this is a huge monument, but he did much more with his art, let's see.
The first time Mr. Washington met my daughter, he said, "Who's this?" And I said, "Well, this is Michaela." And he went in his pocket and he said, "Hi, Michaela." And he took out a candy and he gave it to her. And he said to me, pulled me to the side and said, "Michael, whenever you meet a child, walk with a gift." He said, "Walk with a gift. And whenever you meet a child, give it to that child." That's, I thought about it back and I said, you know. So, in sitting here, I'm realizing that Mr. Washington was probably the most self-aware person that I've ever met. Very self-aware. He was so self-aware that in 1973, he knew the importance of producing the book. Now I'm sitting here, I'm hearing that Mr. Washington, you know, he wrote, designed, and probably did anything else possible to make sure this book came to fruition. I'm going to press Monday, and I have art directors, editors, tons of people working on this project. This is Mr. Washington, one person who's doing everything possible to bring this document to fruition. 1972, 73. I guarantee you, the works of Bearden, the auction records today, is directly connected to the prevalence of ritual. So in essence, financially, Mr. Washington is responsible for millions and millions of dollars wealth by those who own the work, by those who bring the work to auctions, by the museums who own Bearden. I can say to you that this is directly connected to Mr. Washington's vision and being self-aware to put his agenda aside and bringing forth Romare Bearden's agenda.
A big part of what I've done as a writer, I got my first check when I was 17 for my work. Wow. And I decided right then and there that what I wanted to do with my words was to paint us, to paint African Americans in a way that I just didn't see them on television. I just didn't see them in newspapers. I rarely saw them in books. I didn't want to see us like this anymore. In those to see us in the mug shots anymore. I wanted to show what I grew up with in church, watching preachers and deacons and deaconesses applauding us.
I'm so blessed that he crossed my path, that I came in contact with him, and up to today, he's one of my treasured memories. And I know for the longest time, Bunch is going to be with me. You know, in the times of creativity, when I have painter's block or a block in creativity, sometimes I think of the encounter I have with him.
Notwithstanding his brilliant mind and artistic capacity, Bunch suffered through chronic poverty through many parts of his life. Despite his renowned mentor, Romare Bearden, recommending his work highly and giving him a lot of praise for the innovative art he was doing, his work was never represented in a gallery. And so unfortunately, his desire to sustain his family and fulfill their needs through his artwork was never really accomplished.
And burn away all things, then set thy foot into the land of the lovers, the lovers.
Consistency is key, but it can go both ways. See, most days people stuck in their old ways, so they feel sad, bad, and never know room for new paths. All that is flowing through you, the wind that always knew you within. You know the king that inspired you, the empire sent. I guess that made me the employee, so enjoy this whole life thing. And no matter what life brings, no matter a life stings, sometimes just to foreshadow that your last battle had to happen for you. Saddle, but we rarely see it that way. And thinking positive, synonymous to willing and praying. I wonder if they feel the melodies or hear what I'm saying. You know, conveying it up to run that play with something, to run that play of every day. What we were saying, the music was on the way, never doubted we had to say. I put my heart in my wallet through all it. She always kept me sane. I did the same in Lane in 05 when that lymphoma pain brought change. It wasn't a coma, but things in our life started to change. It was Hodgkin's to be exact. Pray that a doctor from Hopkins would hop in, but we ain't have enough change to proceed. Ended up at Walter Reed, luckily cause of my father's military deeds. He was a chief naval quartermaster. I thank God for his water chapters because we didn't have to move backwards. I was only 11 when I got the news. I ain't know what to do, knew she'd be proud if I kept my grades up in school. One afternoon I came home and seen my uncle car parked in the driveway. Talked to him the other day about a haircut. Went out back, I seen her getting a haircut. It was hard seeing my mother without a long hair, so I went out the front door for a little fresh air, thinking, damn, well, this ain't fair. But I knew right then and there I had to react with strength and exempt my thoughts from death and stress so she could do her absolute best.